Well, it's a sad time for the Vegas Golden Knights fans. We're out of the playoffs, and now it's time for the offseason. What's on, guys? Jay Hoyd back with you. Today, it's a sad time for the Vegas Golden Knights after getting eliminated in game number 7 versus the Dallas Stars. A rough showing for them, obviously not the way you want to go out given that they won the cup last year and you try to, at least put up a good effort and, get back to at least the Stanley Cup final. Even if you get beat by, some hot team in the East, at least you made it back. You still showed you were a really good team. But to make it to the playoffs kind of at the last second and then put the almost the number 1 seed to game 7, I mean, that's pretty solid. Obviously, this year was not ideal, right? We had tons of injuries. Lots of moving pieces, some new additions at the trade deadline. And of course, now is time for the offseason. And this one's going to be a relatively big offseason, if you ask me. Because we came off the cup, right? We pretty much we kept the entire team together with the exception of just one player. That's Riley Smith, right? They had to re-sign Barbashev. They wanted to keep him. In order to do that, they had to trade away Riley Smith. They didn't have to. There probably would have been some other players I would have rather done, but that's what they decided to do. So Riley Smith went to Pittsburgh for, I think it was like a 3rd-round pick or something like that. So what does Vegas do now, right? Because we have a good amount of players that are UFAs, and I want to kind of break down what they should do, break down who is expiring, should they re-sign them, should they not, because they are definitely fighting the cap space once again. So let's jump into cap friendly as we do for all of our contracts and see who's expiring this year. All right, so here we are taking a look on cap friendly. Just want to make sure everything looks good before we get into this one. But yes, so we are here on cap friendly. And we have all of the players, at least on the NHL team. Of course, there's all of the people that are in the AHL down below, which we'll get to. But as far as our NHL roster goes, so for the most part, we have 5 players that are expiring this year. I'm going to break them down positionally after this and kind of talk about them more. But the biggest one, arguably, is Jonathan Marchessault. He is up for a contract after coming off a career year of $5 million last year. You have Anthony Mantha as well, a trade deadline acquisition. You have Chandler Stevenson, who is due for an upgrade in a contract, if you will. And then also William Carrier, $1.4 million, one of the original Misfits, as well as Pavel Dorofeyev is a RFA. So, I mean, obviously they still got team control there. And then also Michael Amadio, coming off of a minimal contract as a pending UFA. As well as, I guess, the most notable one from the defensive side being Alec Martinez. And they did sign Noah Hannafin to that 8-year contract, $7.35 million. I think it was actually a little higher than that, but I guess that's just what the cap hit is. So he got extended. Ben Hutton got extended. And then as far as goaltenders go, if we look at the main two, that probably will be the same 2 next year unless there is a trade or anything, is Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson, both under contract for next year, as well as minor league goaltender Yuri Patura, who is down there as something I don't really understand is the UFA Group 6. Not really sure how all that works, but he is, I'm guessing, a pending UFA. Don't know how all that works. As well as on LTIR is Robin Leonard for at least 1 more year. So, I'm not really going to be talking about him at all in the rest of this because, again, I haven't heard anything about him. So other than that, when we scroll down to the AHL, a couple of guys up for contracts for pending UFAs. I mean, I don't see them making the NHL squad or really doing anything with them, so they probably won't be back, but you never know. As well as Mason Primeau, who is a pending RFA, as well as Ivan Morozov. Don't even know who that is. As well as Leighton Ayak, I think it is, pending RFA, as well as Caden Korachek, also a pending RFA, as well as goaltender Isaiah Seville, not really sure, also a pending RFA, which again has some kind of something with it. So where does that put us here? So that puts us in Microsoft Excel here with the possible roster. So this is the current roster with all of the pending RFAs, pending UFAs, and all of the AHL players kind of pulled out of it. You know, obviously I'm not going to list all of the AHL players, but as far as the NHL players go. So obviously we have some holes here, and we need to fill them somehow. So what was the number? I think it was like $6 million. Let me find it. So going into next year, the salary cap is scheduled to rise up. What is that? 3.5, a little bit more than almost 4 million, 4.2 million, something like that, to $87.7 million for the salary cap. And right now with Vegas, they have $897,000 as projected cap space for next year. So if we were to put that into consideration from this last year, they could probably re-sign Michael Amadio, right? So I don't think that number includes players that are expiring. I don't think they count that contract for next year. So obviously, let's take a first look at the pending unrestricted free agents, right? Now, when we look at our pending UFAs, we have Jonathan Marchessault, who had a career year, right? You want him back 100%. So we'll move him over here in this next row. Stevenson. Now, given what Stevenson brings to your team, so he is coming off a 4-year contract valued at $2.75 million per year. So 4 years, $11 million that he signed in October of 2020. So cool, right? That's not a terrible contract. Now, given what he gives to this team, not a bad contract. However, when he signed that contract in 2020, right, he came off of a year where he was acquired by the Vegas Golden Knights after not really doing too well in the Washington Capitals organization, where he then came over, did pretty well in that year, about halfway through the year or so, had a little bit of a slower year, but not a bad year at 35 points in 51 games, pretty good plus minus as well. And then after that year, he put up 35 points, and I already said that. And then the next year, right, 2021-22, he put up 64 points. The next year, 65 points in a relatively healthy year, only missing a couple of games. And then this last year, he did miss a handful of games or so, and still had 51 points. So that's pretty solid, right? So since he signed that contract, that's definitely due for an upgrade. However, if he wants anything more than like $3.5 million, he's gonna have they're gonna have to let him walk, right? With the addition of Hertl. Now, don't get me wrong, getting a player like Tomas Hertl is great, but at the same time, you did not need him, right? So you take Hertl out of this equation, and you bump these two centers up, Karlsson and Waugh, and you still have a really solid center core, right? You might be able to bump Waugh up to the third line permanently. You bring in Cotter. You put Howden down there. You bring up a guy like Brisson, maybe play left wing. You have any of these young guys, potentially get somebody in free agency, and you'd still be in a good position, right? You bring back a Carrier. You bring back a Mantha. Or bring back a Amadio is the one I really meant to say. But you bring back one of those other guys, and you fill that role fine, right? You did not need Hertl in this case. Now, obviously, we have him, and now we have him for a long time. So, I can't be, super upset with that. So now looking at it with Eichel, Hertl, Karlsson, and Waugh as your basically 4 centers, that even then, Karlsson was still playing like almost like a second line in most of that case. So, in my opinion, I don't think you're going to be able to bring Stevenson back, right? Especially given that he's going to want a bigger contract. You're not going to have the money for him, right? You'd have to do a few other moves in order to be able to bring Stevenson back. So unfortunately, you're going to have to let him walk, which sucks because he's provided 3 really solid years for you, like almost like point per game, not point per game, a little bit under point per game, but like almost like first, second line numbers, and he's been really solid for them. So it sucks that it has to end like this, but at the same time, they just don't have the money to throw around like that anymore. So unfortunately, Stevenson has to walk. Now, our next player is William Carrier. Now, he did sign a 4-year contract as well in the same year as Stevenson, a 4-year, $5.6 million contract in February of 2020, and he is now in the last year of that contract. So, again, let's take a look. Right in 2020, or I guess the year before, he put up 19 points in 71 games, right? He's a fourth line left wing checking, type guy. Since then, he has not been very healthy, has not completed a full game almost ever in his career, which he then, in his first year of that contract, he put up 15 points in 52 games. Next year, he had 20 points in 63 games. The next year after that, being last year, was 56 games played, 25 points, which is actually a career high for him in the NHL. And then this last year, he was pretty banged up, right? 39 games played, 8 points, and then did play in the playoffs. So overall, William Carrier is a fourth line left wing, right? Plain and simple, he's not anything more than that, right? So if it were me, I would never offer a guy that's a fourth line checking type guy anything more than about $1 to $1.5 million, right? So that 1.4 is already at that kind of, last part of what I would offer him, because the reason I say that is if you look at a new fourth line, you have Cotter, you have Howden, you have Brisson, you have Brondbjerg, or you have anybody else that's a older or that kind of role player that you can sign to a similar contract, put up the same amount of production, and be overall the same type of impact on your team. So Carrier probably won't want a bigger contract by any means, probably around the similar $1 to $1.5 million. He's been very banged up. He didn't really play much last year. So there's two things here. If he wants, let's just say 1 year, $1 million, or like 2 or 3 years, $1 million, I would say sign him to that. But anything more than that, I would say let him walk, because you have other players that can fill into that spot totally fine. So that's what I would say about William Carrier. So I'll say for the right price, keep him. But if he wants a similar contract to what he made last year or an upgrade from what he made last year, then let him go, because you have options that you could definitely work with. Our next player, Anthony Mantha. So Anthony Mantha was acquired at the deadline for a pair of draft picks, and in 18 games in the regular season, like I said, following the trade deadline, he actually had pretty decent numbers. So basically playing in the middle six for the Knights, he put up 10 points in 18 games, right? It took him a few games to get going, but once he was doing that, he was actually playing pretty okay. And in that time, +6 as well, and then played 3 of the first games in the playoffs. And I think he got injured, or maybe he just got pulled out of the lineup. I don't remember. But either way, Mantha is coming off a relatively big contract. And I obviously know it wasn't Vegas that signed him to that contract, but it was a 4-year, $22.8 million that Detroit signed him to. Eventually, he got traded in the middle of that contract. But yeah, coming off of a $5.7 million contract, which arguably he did not deserve, in my opinion. I would definitely unless, right, he would have to accept like a very low ball offer. And $2 or $3 million to play like second or third line. But at the same time, when you look at the players that are still on Vegas, or more importantly, the players that you want to bring back, I would definitely want Marchessault first, Stevenson second, and then, again, for the right price, bring him back. But at this point, you're probably not going to be able to afford whatever his ask is for a contract. So you're going to have to let him walk. Our next player, Michael Amadio. So out of all the players so far, I mean, like I said, Marchessault, Stevenson, I would love to bring back. Michael Amadio, which I guess I didn't realize, but he actually had 27 points this year in 73 games. And then last year, he actually matched his total from last year as well. So realistically, he's due for a little bit of an upgrade. Now, if he wants, I'll say, I don't know, like, I'll say $1 million or so or under. Or I'll say even like 1.5 million or under, then I would say keep him around, maybe for a year or two, right? Depending on how his production is, how he fits in the rest of the team. But if he wants anything more than that, let him walk, right? And I hate to say that just of all these players, just let him walk. But again, you're going to have free agency. You're going to have young players that are looking for spots. And overall, you have a team that is very, very tight on money. So if they can bring him back and he plays on the third line, cool, right? You should have a decent bargain there. Or if he wants a decent amount of money, you're going to have to let him walk. So again, that's the same thing as Carrier. For the right price, bring him back. But if he wants too much, you got to let him walk. And obviously, our last player to really talk about as far as our forward group goes is Pavel Dorofeyev, which has shown some pretty good promise so far in the NHL. He is a pending RFA. I definitely would bring him back, sign him to a couple years, hopefully some of a low contract, bring him in, and hopefully he can kind of fit in second line, maybe even first line, depending on who he kind of gels with the most, because in my opinion, I would not have Stone and Hurdle on the same line. I feel like they're too much of the same player, and they're both kind of slow. So I would definitely separate those two if possible. But for now, we'll leave Dorofeyev over there. We'll keep him there, and we'll keep that hole open until we kind of figure it out from there. Down to our defense. Once again, we are very stacked on defense with pretty much everybody returning, right? Everyone that you see on our depth chart right kind of next to me is under contract for next year. Now, obviously, you don't need to do anything with them until we get to the what moves they need to make. But, I mean, if you go into that with that lineup right there, I mean, you have the same lineup, right? You're good, right? At the same time, which I didn't mention, Alex Martinez is over here under the pending UFA list over here. And unfortunately, sorry to say it, Martinez, time to move on, right? It's just, he's old. He has done everything you can kind of do in the league. You're a, 3-time Stanley Cup champion. Even if you wanted, like, a minimal contract or come to camp on a PTO or, like, a very low contract, I would say keep you. But at the same time, you're going to kind of be a 7th or 8th defenseman right now without any other moves, that is. So, in my opinion, if he wants to try to go look elsewhere, go do it. You might be able to find a consistent lineup. Or you stay in Vegas and you accept a role as a rotation defenseman and see what happens there. Because you're not going to make anywhere close to what you're coming off of. And you're not going to stay anywhere close to that money. So it depends on what you want to do. Do you want to come back and still play for a minimal contract? Or do you want to move on and try to make a little bit more money? So again, if it's the right price, you could keep him. And in what I'm going to talk about in a little bit, you could potentially stay. So I guess I'll keep him for the right price keep, but maybe not. And then as far as our goaltenders, both Hill and Thompson are under contract for next year. So assuming those guys stick around, I mean, there's your 2 goalies. So not really much to talk about there. Along with Patera, again, is a pending UFA with the Group 6. Again, not sure what that means. Robin Leonard still on ITLR. All right, the last part of this video is we want to talk about what Vegas should do. And again, this is assuming, we already talked about who we should bring back. We already talked about what, players we should keep if it's the right price. One player we should just let walk. And we have a couple holes, right? We need to fill them. So assuming, this lineup stays the same and doesn't bring back anybody, you slot Cotter into the fourth line. You could even put Brisson on the third line. Ronberg might be your extra forward. And then you have a left wing spot, which easily could be Dorofeev, right? I would almost guarantee they're going to bring him back. And then you have one more spot on the top line that even you could put Stone up there. You could move, I don't even know. You could put Hertl as a center or a left wing. You could put Waugh up there, put Ronberg on the fourth line with Kolesar, with Cotter, with somebody, or bring up somebody else. Or you could do so many things with this lineup, right? But again, we want to bring Marchessault back, but we don't have the cap space. So there is a couple of moves that I would definitely recommend making if I were the Vegas Golden Knights. And the first one being a trade. And what you'd get back for this trade, I'm not exactly sure. But one player that I would suggest getting rid of is defenseman Nick Hague. Now, the reason I say that is because he is 25 years old. He still has somewhat of an upside. He is still young. He is still under contract for next year. And even after that second year going into 25-26, that year of the 25-26, he is still an RFA. So you still have some team control with Nicholas Hague. Now, he is a player that has been on the third line ever since he's been up in the NHL and should not be higher than a third line left defenseman. And he kind of maxes out between, I'll just say averaging around 15 points a year, which for a third line defenseman is pretty much a good year, right? You don't expect much out of a third line pair at all. So given that they gave him 2 years at $2.294 million, we'll say $2.3 million for 2 years is already okay, what are we doing? But trading that salary away would free up $2.3 million, right? So I'm going to put Hague over here just so we can kind of, look at the numbers, right? 2.3 mil, right? We'll put that there. So that would immediately put Hutton back in the conversation as almost an everyday guy. That would allow you to keep Martinez maybe as a minimal contract. You have some players in the AHL, some younger defensemen that are looking to make the jump to the NHL that might elevate them into that spot, right? So now you've freed up $2.3 million for Hague. If you can get a young defenseman or a young defenseman and a prospect or a young defenseman and a draft pick or something, try to make up some picks for the ones that you traded for Mantha or traded for Hannafin or, whatever the case is. Try to get back some draft picks for the draft upcoming in June, right? That would give you some money off the books. You get back a decent return. And overall, I think you'd make out for the best, right? It gives you more flexibility. Another player I would suggest trading away to, again, free up some money is going to be Nick Waugh. Now, I'll say a caveat to this, and unless you're going to give him I'll say bigger role, but bigger might not be the right word. I would say a more different role, because Nick Waugh has shown he can easily be a third line center or even play in the top 9. But playing on the fourth line and still putting up 41 points this last year is pretty impressive. But also, he kind of moves around a lot too, depending on injuries or depending on what's going on. So if you're not going to bring back Marchessault, then you have to elevate Waugh up to a top 9 role. You just have to, right? So whether you put Stone on the top line and then you bring up Waugh to the second line, or you figure out how to mix these players, and then you bring in Cotter to center, put Ronberg as your left wing or something. I don't know. But unless you're going to elevate Waugh up to a bigger role, then I would suggest trading him. because who would you rather have? Marchessault or Waugh, right? Now, if you were to trade Waugh, right, we'll bring him over here. That is, Waugh still has $3 million for 3 more years on his contract. So trading away Waugh would, again, open up some flexibility to bring back Marchessault, right? Or you could bring back Stevenson or somebody else that you can elevate to a top 6, top 9 even role. And overall, you'd have, your higher end players there. And overall, you'd be in a lot better of a case. Because in my opinion, as much as you want to roll 4 lines, I just feel like he's wasting it away on the third line when he could be a little bit better up with playing with somebody else and putting in that same production without having to spend more money on another player to play up there. Because if you had a guy like Amadio playing on that second line and you had Waugh on the fourth line, I just don't see how that works, right? I know Carrier, Waugh, and Kolesar was a good line, but at the same time, if Carrier's gone, if you elevate Waugh, then you put different players on that fourth line, then you can hopefully bring back some energy, create a new fourth line and have some better, situations there. Then our next thing that I saw mainly comes from one of the articles that I saw this past week, after Vegas got eliminated, and they were talking about some crazy stuff. And I mean, there was, an article that says they should be trading Pietrangelo because of the $8.8 million contract, which, is not a terrible take by any means. One other one was, we gotta trade Zach Whitecloud because he isn't, where he should be, given his contract and what his, upside was. I saw somebody say we should trade Aiden Hill, to free up $4.9 million. Then I saw someone else say we got to trade Theodore because of his impending free agency after next year. So there's lots of moves that could be made. And in my opinion, if you want to bring back Marchessault, then my first 2 things would be trading at least Nick Hague. And if you don't want to trade Nick Waugh, okay, I understand. But then one other player that I was floating around in my head while I was thinking about it is Brett Howden. Now, he is making $1.9 million next year as well. And then he is a UFA. Now, he is not producing much better than a fourth line numbers anyway. So if you could get that money off the books, bring back Amadio, bring back Carrier that put up the same stuff at a lower contract, boom, problem solved. So you would create, what is that, $6.2 million? I think that is. Maybe my math's off a little bit. But either way, we'll say about $6 million, almost $7 million even or so if you got rid of Waugh, Howden, and Hague. And then it would allow you to bring Marchessault back. You might have the money to bring Stevenson back. Maybe. Or if you don't want to do any of those, you keep those guys in the lineup. Then you're left with a lineup that kind of looks like this. And of course, it'd be a lot different, once you got into the season with, who plays good with each other, who's got the chemistry and everything else. But it's going to look different next year, right? Business is business at the end of the day. We're going to see some turnover this year for sure. I just hope for Vegas' sake that somehow, some way, we can bring back Marchessault. The other 4 or 5 guys, I'll say, that are all UFAs, Mantha, Stevenson, Carrier, Amadio, and Martinez. And lots of stuff for GM Kelly McCrimmon to figure out over the next few months before next season starts. But I know this was a little bit of a longer video, so I thank you guys so much for sticking around with me. Let me know all of your comments and thoughts down below. What should Vegas do? What kind of moves should they make? Should they bring back Marchessault? Should they bring back these players? What would you do to be able to keep those players? Or what would kind of numbers have to be for, guys like Marchessault, Stevenson, you name it, the guys we talked about, to come back to the team? What would you try to sign them to a deal? Let me know everything down below in that comment section. But as always, guys, if you did enjoy the video, make sure you hit the like button down below if you haven't yet. Or if you're brand new here, make sure to subscribe. And as always, guys, we'll see you